welcome back, welcome back. This is going to be interesting. What I want to do now is to have a look at what's making the headlines from a very different angle. So every Sunday, I'm going to be taking a look at the news through the eyes of the faithful. For instance, this week we've got Imam Saba Ahmadi and Rabbi Yitzhak Shoket. They're going to be joining me to discuss some things going on in the headlines. Now, the first thing is Twitter. You would have read all week about Elon Musk taking over Twitter, and the deal is expected to be finalised between 3 and 6 months. Well, Jonathan Greenblatt, who's CEO of the Anti-Defamation League, has already voiced concern about Mr. Musk's pronouncement about free speech. Now, the ADL, which is a Jewish civil rights organisation, is one of several groups that help Twitter moderate hateful content, serving on the company's Trust and Safety Council. Now, Greenblatt was echoed by Sumaya Wahid, who's the Senior Policy Council for Muslim Advocates, which also says that this is a concern. This is a concern. So that's something that I want to discuss with our guests. Please welcome. I'm really excited about this. Imam Saba Ahmadi and Rabbi Yitzhak Shoket. Welcome, both of you.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, let me just say to the Imam, Happy Eid. Eid al-Fitr, as it started.
It is. So Eid starts tomorrow. It's the last fast day. So thank you, Trisha. Yeah, thank you. It's the celebrations begin this evening and tomorrow.
Oh, and shalom to the rabbi as well.
Thank you. Good to be with you, Trisha.
So let's start. It's strange, really, I'm having both of you on the show. It's wonderful. I mean, I spent a lot of time in the Middle East and learned Arabic, and my partner is Jewish. So there you go. I'm firmly in the middle. Let's talk about Elon Musk taking over Twitter and the concerns that have been voiced. Imam, first let's start with you. Do you have concerns, and if so, what are they?
You know what? I think the conversation is, excuse me, what is this saying is you're allowing to incite violence, hatred, and genocide, right? And I think the concern is that we're trying to create a baseline of morality, but with this, we're arguing to remove that baseline. And I had a conversation with my wife yesterday, and we've got a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old, and we tried to instill good values in them, right? We tried to say, look, don't use horrible words to each other, don't call each other silly or stupid, because then, of course, you'll go to school and say that. And I think that's really important, to instill those good values in your children. But now, getting rid of limitations in freedom of speech, what we're saying, in essence, is kids can go to school, abuse their teachers, say whatever they want, and you can't reform a nation without reforming its youth first, and that education starts at home, right? So there's got to be limits on freedom of speech, because otherwise you can really hurt people's values and sentiments.
Rabbi, your feelings on Twitter and this whole pronouncement from Elon Musk about really bringing in freedom of speech?
I think freedom of speech has to be tempered, obviously, with responsible speech, but I have absolutely no problem with Elon Musk taking over Twitter. He made the observation himself when he said that the far left hates everyone, in his words themselves included, but then he added later on, I'm no fan of the far right either. And his words, let's have less hate and more love. The truth of the matter is that there is an element of freedom of speech, and there is an element of illegal speech. And I think, frankly, the idea of banning people, the idea of just kicking people off Twitter, etc., goes against the grain of democracy. And I'm speaking as a Jew who's been a victim of anti-Semitism. I don't believe in permanent bans. I do believe when there's illegal activity, very specifically, and there's a broad range of that because racial hatred is an illegal activity, then fair enough. But other than that, none of that is right or should indeed be possible.
So you're slightly at odds here, Imam. Should it be pure freedom of speech, but with policing, if you like, for hate crimes and things like that?
Look, I think social media platforms have a responsibility as to what they put on their platform. Do you know what I mean? We are responsible for what happens in our own houses.
Yeah.
So social media platforms have got to have a responsibility. Look, it's important to have that level of respect. Everyone knows what their level of respect is. If we walk down the street and we saw someone verbally abusing somebody else, or saying, oh, you're ugly, or you're this and you're that, we'd stop in and stand and say, look, that's not appropriate. So I think it's important to have empathy, put yourself in someone else's shoes, and just think, if that abuse was happening towards me, I'm all for freedom of speech, 100%. It's what the faith teaches, but it comes with limitations. It comes with restrictions, as with every code of conduct, as with every workplace, you know what I mean? So you have to have those limits. Otherwise,
so I guess what you're saying, it's down to Twitter to adequately police what they have on their platform. Rabbi, would you say they do a good enough job at the moment? Let's not just focus on Twitter, but across social media.
Well, just coming back to Twitter for one brief moment, I think there's an element of hypocrisy when they choose to ban Donald Trump, and I'll stress I'm no fan of his, but if they choose to ban Donald Trump and yet they leave the head of the Taliban on Twitter, President of Russia is still on Twitter, Ayatollah Khomeini is still on Twitter, et cetera, then there's double standards, and it's quite clear that it's a lot of personal politics and whatever agendas featuring in the equation. Generally speaking, absolutely. I think all social media has a responsibility to police somewhat. Facebook does a very good job of putting people in what they call Facebook jail. They never issue permanent bans, but they will kick you off for a period of time. And obviously, that'll be frustrating enough for people to ensure to curb their own language, as it were. And I think the general responsibility of all social media platforms is simply to find that fine line between, again, freedom of speech and what constitutes essentially illegal speech. Because otherwise, what I take offense in, what you take offense in.
What were you...
Tracy,
Imam, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the freedom of speech and the freedom to abuse are two things, and the fine line's got to be drawn there. Not only on Twitter, but I've had abuse as a young British Imam on TikTok, on other social media platforms, where I've been called a lot of different things. My wife, my children have been abused. My mum's been abused. Do you know what I mean? So people have got to take responsibility, not only for their actions and words, but also social media spaces have got to take responsibility for what goes on their platform, because they've got to monitor what happens, because that can then lead to people being killed, hurt. Do you know what I mean? And we can't live in a society where everyone can say whatever they want under the sun, because that doesn't lead to a society based on harmony, peace, and love. You've got to take responsibility for what you say. We can't say what you want. Do you know what I mean?
But what about people who say, if you don't want to hit... Sorry, Rabbi?
No, I think there's a key point that needs to be addressed over here. And Jack Dorsey, former owner of was a large shareholder of Twitter, made the point. At the end of the day, what people really need, and to reassure everybody, is a transparent system, both in policy and operations. That's the right way that you're going to earn trust across the board. Whether it's a company or it's an open protocol, that doesn't matter. As long as, and as much as deliberately deciding to be open about every decision, and people need to know why it's made. Obviously, it's not easy, but that's the only way forward.
Okay, we're going to take a bit of a break there. I'm talking with Imam Saba Ahmadi and Rabbi Yitzhak Shochet, and I hope you please correct me after the break if I've got that wrong. We'll be back with more right after this. Welcome back with me, Trisha Goddard. I'm looking at the news through a different lens, so to speak. I'm joined by Imam Saba Ahmadi and Rabbi Yitzhak Shochet, and we're discussing some of the things that have hit the news. We've been talking about Elon Musk's takeover of Twitter, but gentlemen, I want to just change the subject to the French election, which has just been going on, and we heard yet again about how Marine Le Pen, who was defeated in the election, brought up the whole topic of banning the burqa. on also looking at many cases, many reports that we've been reading over the years in, for instance, London, of young women wearing, covering their hair, having their coverings pulled off, and also young men and men with yarmulkes or skull caps, to people who may not understand that, having them removed and being insulted. So let's talk about people literally wearing their faith, and how you deal with your congregation or people coming to you and talking about these sorts of things. Let me start with you, Rabbi.
Look, I remember that story that happened. It was a number of years ago, where it was a woman who was wearing a cross. Yeah. I believe it was at work at British Airways or something like that, and there was a whole issue about her being banned or being told not to do so, and that created quite an uproar. Frankly, what we wear in regard to our own religion should not offend anybody else, and unless there's something overt about what we're doing that obstructs or impedes in some way on society, it's a case of live and let live. And then you have to question about whether or not there's an ulterior motive when people are issuing edicts of trying to block yarmulkes, hijabs, and whatever else besides.
And what do you say, though? I remember reading the report of a young lad, I think it was in London, having his yarmulke ripped off his head, with young people when they want to follow their faith and dress like, their friends, but there is that juxtaposition with, people being attracted by that to give them abuse, if you like.
Granted, and then it becomes a question of strengthening the conviction of the particular individual. It happened to my own son. He was walking down the street a number of years ago, and he was a fair bit younger, and somebody walked right past him, took his yarmulke off his head, carried on walking. He cleverly just watched and waited, and the gentleman just tossed it in a bin somewhere on the street, and he went to retrieve it, and we reported it subsequent to that. And then it becomes a question of just trying to teach our children, or whomever it is, to have the strength of their convictions in the face of whatever, because there's always going to be people out there who are going to resent people who are different to themselves.
Imam?
Fisher, how can we justify abusing someone based on how they dress? You can't. It's sad. It's sad that people feel that they can attack someone, pull someone's headscarf off, throw stones at them, egg them. How can you egg someone because they're wearing a headscarf or a burqa? Do you know what I mean? Like,
that's
let people
happened?
live. Yeah, it's happened. Of course it's happened. People in our community have had their headscarves pulled off. Like, it is an occurrence, and it's so sad that we still live in a time where we talk about freedom to express yourself how you want to express, right? People want to dress the way they want to dress. Let them be. No one's forcing someone to wear a hat or a burqa or a face veil. People choose to wear that. Women aren't forced to wear any of these clothing. It's a personal choice. You ask my wife, secondary school RE teacher, is she forced to wear a headscarf? No. She's a strong, independent woman. If she wants to wear the headscarf, so be it. Do you know what I mean? So let people express themselves how they want to express themselves. And there's no room for abuse. That's not right. You can't force your opinions on somebody else.
But how do you... If somebody comes to you, a young woman comes to you and says, look, it's too difficult to do this.
Yeah, that's fine. That's up to her. If she's struggling and she's facing abuse and she feels that I can't do this, I would be the last person to say, you have to wear a headscarf. You have to dress in a way which you're going to get abused. That just doesn't make sense. Do you know what I mean? Like, people express their faith in a way which they want to express that. It doesn't mean that someone can abuse them even more, be like, oh, because we're throwing stones at them or pulling their headscarf off or abusing them verbally, we'll carry on doing it because it takes them away from their faith. No, everyone's on their own spiritual journey. Everyone's level of conviction is different. I think it's important to respect that and not abuse a personal choice that someone has.
I pick up on that to a flip side, because
yes, please do.
There were some rabbis in Europe who were actually instructing their congregants not to wear yarmulkes when walking in the street so that they don't get attacked. That I actually took serious exception to. At the end of the day, it's not for rabbis to discourage Jews from wearing their identity proudly, and frankly to encourage them to walk with their head below the radar is only just feeding. It's essentially scoring an own goal. if anti-Semitism's objective is to try and cause Judaism to disappear into oblivion, then by virtue of you choosing to react to that by keeping a low profile, you're effectively just defeating the objective. I think it should be left up to individual choice. If it is indeed dangerous for me and I don't want to, that's my prerogative, but no rabbi should be telling me in the first instance whether I should or shouldn't.
Now, we've got a caller, Dave in Wales. Dave, you have a question for our guests. Hello, Dave.
Hello?
Yes, Dave, do you have a question for our guests? We can hear you, I think.
Hello?
Yes, Dave, go ahead.
I can hear you now. It went dead on me.
What was your question, Dave?
No, it's nothing now.
Oh. There we go. Let's move on. I don't think he can hear us. So, do you think that, let me ask you about the perception of religious clothing. Do you think the media in the UK is accepting or helps people understand Judaism and Islam?
Imam? First? Yeah, so I think it's really important to have open conversation and dialogue. I like what you're doing, Trisha, on this conversation. I really respect it. More should happen for us to create a safe space for conversation dialogue. And that's why I took social media, to allow people to ask questions about faith. And I think the media has a massive responsibility in the way different people of faith are perceived. And they have a responsibility to create a society of peace, love and harmony, not always looking at the negative things people do. Also, talk about positive stories, because that's how you gain trust with the members of society. And that's super important. So, yeah, the media have a massive responsibility to report on the good things people do across the spectrum, not only from a certain faith, but from across the board.
Rabbi?
What the media ought to do is one thing. Whether they're doing that is an altogether different matter. And frankly, it's pretty clear that the media has been quite complicit in the past in regard to various aspects of anti-Semitism. Without going into specific detail, I remember a number of years ago when there was a story running that involved a certain high-profile Jewish individual, and his full Jewish name, and with emphasis of the fact that he was Jewish, was there in the press. I remember taking a call at the time from the editor of a particular national newspaper to discuss with me when I came out attacking the paper for its anti-Semitic undertones. He wanted clarity about why and how and what was he doing wrong, and that in itself maybe reflects certain naivete, but be that as it may, as was just said, that the media has to do a lot more than it might in fact already be doing.
Can I make a point, if you don't mind?
We've got, apparently Dave can hear us. Sorry, Dave can hear us. Let's see. Dave, what was your question?
He's gone again.
Oh, gosh.
Please, can I make a point, Trisha?
Sorry. Yes, please do, Imam.
Yeah, so there's a stat came out where it said that a third of Britons feel that Islam threatens the British way of life. I once met someone who works in the media, and they said to me that a reason why people are scared of Islam is because of the burqa or the face veil. And they said it doesn't allow Muslim women to integrate. And when I asked this individual who I met for a coffee, I said, okay, if the face veil, the face covering is an issue, did you walk into this coffee shop wearing a face mask? And they said, yeah. I said, okay, what else could the issue be? And I said, oh, it's the colour of the burqa, it's the colour of the face veil. I said, what colour is it? And she said, oh, it's black. I said, okay. I said, you're wearing a black dress. Does that mean that you can't integrate in society either? And I said, look, I think the issue is that we need to allow people to express themselves how they want to express it, and let them dress the way they want to dress themselves. I said, look, are you a feminist? And she said, yeah. I said, look, I'm sure feminists believe that people have the right to dress the way they want to dress. Wearing the burqa or the face veil doesn't stop Muslim women from integrating. I work with people whose mothers
but
are
do you think the press, but coming back to that, do you think the press exacerbates the differences between faiths?
What do you mean exacerbates the differences between faith and...
Well, they focus on the differences and the others rather than, I've always thought, the similarities.
Well, that's why...
Rabbi, for instance...
Sorry, Trisha.
No, I was going to say, Rabbi, for instance, you brought in the question of the lady with the cross. And nobody would equate that with someone being vilified for wearing a cross, with someone wearing a yarmulke, with someone wearing the burqa.
And I think therein lies the point. At the end of the day, why can't there be a mutual respect for all faiths and people wearing what they choose to wear in respect to their particular faith? If somebody chooses to walk down the street in a full leather garb from head to toe with 22 rings in their nose and 16 in each ear, no one's going to object. No one has an issue with that. So why should there be an issue of me wanting to walk down the street with this on my head, or somebody wanting to walk down the street with a burqa, et cetera, et cetera? Why does society get to choose to discriminate against religion whilst not in any other particular instance? And the media, of course, does tend to focus on the religious identity of people, especially when it comes to particularly juicy stories, if you will, when that aspect of the story is completely irrelevant.
Trisha, the motto of my community is love for all. Sorry, the motto of my community, the motto of my community is love for all, hatred for none. I think we have more in common than not, and we need to unite on the commonalities. Yes. Just because I might have a different coloured skin, I might wear a hat, I might wear funky socks, I might have a beard. That doesn't mean that we're not striving for peace, love and harmony. Do you know what I mean? We're on the same journey. We're here to make society a better place. And once we unite on our commonalities, we grow stronger together as a community. And that's the aim of the game. Absolutely. For every single person out there.
Absolutely. Rabbi, we've got to leave it there, but Rabbi and Imam, thank you so much for that. We've got to do this again.